our last session. We will have a very broad topic, climate, security, resilience, changing nature of global cooperation, and a changing global system. Just a short comment, a short introduction. The changing global system, we have now very a context of uncertainty and flux, with various international actors assuming new, often more confrontational rules. The Russian aggression against Ukraine defined politics and life in Europe and beyond in 22, and will continue to do so in 23 and also 24, at least. The war in Gaza has added a new dimension. These wars have already unleashed dynamics with far-reaching global implications. They are reinforcing the deglobalization tendencies observable, we discussed it, since the financial crisis of 2008-2009, and accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemics. Geopolitics is becoming more important than economics. In geopolitical terms, new centers of power are emerging, while geoeconomically a reconfiguration of energy, production, distribution, and financial systems is underway. The foremost factor shaping the international system is strategic competition between the major democratic and autocratic powers to shape what comes after the era of liberal hegemony. But solving planetary challenges, such as the climate crisis, food and water safety, nuclear proliferation, will demand global cooperation, which is in short supply now. But there are some areas where we have cooperation. For example, we in the European Task Force on Carbon Pricing, we have a very close and, I would say, successful cooperation with China and also with the US, which is very rare indeed. As to the organization of our panel, we have a very diverse expertise. We have ranking from economics, security. We have before agreed to keep our interventions short, so as to leave time for discussion. Where I will first ask the panel to react to interventions, and then I will open the discussion for all for questions. I will also not introduce with doing a long introduction of the speakers. You can read their CVs in the agenda, so as to leave a lot of time for discussions. So let's start, and we would start with Livio Stracca, Deputy Director General, European Central Bank. And I would argue that the euro is one of the geopolitical assets of the EU. Floor is yours.
Thanks for inviting me, and I of course I fully agree on the euro, but here today I wanted to speak a little bit about climate as a place of international cooperation. So I'm just back from the COP28 in Dubai, and so I was thinking, this conference is mainly about geopolitics and international relations. So where are these dimensions important in climate? So kind of to start with, I can think of three areas where this is, the geopolitical dimension is crucial for the climate agenda. So one is, which is perhaps not very much emphasized, aspect of the transition is that fossil fuels, which is the source of energy we want to abate, are mainly produced in autocracies, in dictatorship of autocracies, and there is also a reason for that. So there is a large literature saying essentially that the production of commodities, in particular fossil fuels, polarizes society and leads to poor institutions, and in some cases even predatory institutions. In fact, there are very few countries around the world that export commodities that have good institutions. So Botswana is one, Norway, but there are not so many examples. So while the hope is that producing renewables can be done also in countries with better institutions, in democracies. So there is this element of democracies or countries with better institutions versus autocracies that is also an important element. And I find it is an aspect that is not very, it's not emphasized enough. So I would see as an additional independent reason to do the green transition. If it was not about global warming, that alone I think would be a reason enough to do the green transition. So the second aspect, and this has been emphasized in a recent paper by the IMF, which is online, so you can read it if you're interested. So here the dimension is if there are geopolitical tensions, and if these tensions concern countries that produce and export fossil fuels, think of Russian gas after the Russia-Ukraine war, so this creates a snowballing effect of political reaction, which may tend or has tended to double down on fossil fuels. So the reaction of many countries eventually, because they are scared of the electorate, facing very high and volatile energy prices, so the kind of the knee-jerk reaction has been to double down on fossil fuels, and we have seen even a resurgence of coal. Which we all hope is going to be very temporary. So, and this can create also a lock-in effect. So once you increase the production of fossil fuels or you rekindle the production, then you don't close down coal plants, you don't close down oil and gas extraction facilities. You even build new, for example, liquid gas terminals. And this facility have a long life. So all these things leads to a kind of a lock-in of fossil fuels. So this is a direct channel by which geopolitical tensions lead to entrenchment of the old form of energy, which is suboptimal. So this is an aspect which has been very much emphasized, as I said, in IMF paper, but it's been also very important in the climate agenda. And the final point I want to emphasize, again in the area of international relations, geopolitics, and so on, is the global public good nature of climate. So you know very well, probably better than me, that there are different types of global public goods. So, for example, you have types where what is important is the best effort, the best country. So, for example, going to the moon is a global public good that depends on the effort of the best. You also have cases where the global public good depends on the effort of the worst. So, say in a pandemic, if there is a virus in any country in the world, then this is a problem for the whole world. So, what is important is the weakest link. But climate change is one of those public good cases where what is really important is the sum. So, it's the sum of what, or the average, if you want. So, the sum of what countries do is crucial. And here, of course, there are divergent interest. Partly divergent interest is you can see it as a north-south. So you can see the country in the south are those which will be affected by global warming in a negative way, while the north, countries like Canada or Scandinavia, will actually benefit from global warming. So you have this north-south divide in terms of relative economic gain and losses. You have also a question of fairness. So this has been emphasized by many authors. I mean, somebody who has spoken a lot about this is Galina Hale, so U.S. academic, but also others. So the idea is that what matters is not the flow of emission, but is a stock. So even though emerging countries have a much larger flow of emissions now, in terms of stock, is the rich countries that have emitted in the stock of emissions. So how we do compensate for this? So how do we create this fairness between the north and the south? And then there is probably a final divide is also the kind of the south that produces fossil fuels and the south that doesn't. And this also is a very divergent interest. So you have seen that in Dubai there was some criticism of the organizers of the conference because in the end this is an oil-producing country. So, but of course, in many emerging economies don't have oil, don't have gas, don't have coal. So, so you see there are fault lines a bit everywhere. And so here I wanted just to make it, a short introduction of the many dimensions in which geopolitics intrude in the climate agenda, and it's very much an international relations problem at the end of the day. So as an introduction, I stop here. Thank you.
Christine Muttonen, Vice President, Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy and co-president of Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. She was also the second woman chair of the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE, which is very important, or was very important for European security. So she will talk also about security.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and good afternoon. Well, yes, it's a question of justice, you said, and I think what we see now with climate change is that what scientists predicted, the warnings of the scientists now are coming true. When we look at climate issues from the security point of view, so climate change certainly has a lot of direct and indirect impacts on practically everything on Earth. It is changing the security architecture and is creating complex risk for society. And in that case, it is deepening already political problems, social problems, economic problems. And we have been talking a lot about economic problems today and yesterday about financial crisis and global money flows. But I think climate change, in fact, is the meta question, the meta question of how to deal with our world in the end. So when you look, because you mentioned nuclear proliferation, if you look at the atomic scientists, they call the time now as a time of unprecedented danger, because there are only 90 seconds left to midnight. So 90 seconds left to midnight is really a short time. They moved the hand of the doomsday clock forward because of the increased nuclear danger. We see it, we realized what's happening now in the world. And at the same time, this undermines the global efforts to combat climate change, the second biggest threat. So there are those two big threats that the atomic scientists talk about. And when you think about, because we talk about money here and finance, when you think about the money which is spent in the next decades for renewable nuclear powers for testing and so on. So this is such an incredible amount of money, and when you think about what you could do with it, then you really can come to the point what you said, what is just and what is not just. So 10 years ago, when you started to talk about the nexus of climate change and security, people really, you faced a lack of understanding really. But this has changed since we are faced with these extreme storms, heat waves, forest fires. And you can see the ice caps melting and the glaciers melting. So I'm co-organizer of a little conference close to the highest mountain of Austria, and you know it, you've seen it. And if you come again, you can see practically each year the glacier shrinking. You just can see it shrinking. And when you take this, when you think about the glaciers, like in Central Asia, for example, this has enormous impact on water security. There will be shortage of water, there will be floodings and landslides. but there are also increased droughts, which means there will be food insecurity. Food insecurity will worsen, and the prices will skyrocket. And as a further problem of this food crisis, for example, there will be civil unrest and political instability, especially in those areas where the democratic pressure is very strong. And you see, we realized some weeks ago, I think, small states will lose their territories. So you remember when we could read in the press that the small island of Tuvalu signed an agreement with Australia, so that the inhabitants were granted climate asylum. When we think of the rising sea level, so the UN says that the number of people who are at high risk because of rising sea level is said to have increased from 160 million to 260 million in the last 3 decades. So we had the example of Bangladesh, for example. 20 million of people were predicted to lose their homes by 2050. And megacities, we have a lot of megacities that are at the sea, at the mouth of rivers, and only 1% of the people, they occupy only 1% of the planet's Earth surface, but about 50% of the world population is living there. So if some of those megacities are flooded with all the infrastructure, with the knowledge that is there, with the high amount of people, so we know that this is going to be a security issue. And then we have the climate migration, which could be 1.2 billion by 2050. Climate migrants are often defined as forgotten victims of climate change due to the lack of precise data on the one side, and then on the other side, because they are not protected by any international law. So we again have a good example. The Horn of Africa, you had a drought which was the worst in 40 years. Many people had to flee. They had to cross the borders, the international borders, and now they came to refugee camps which were overcrowded, and then now you have this enormous floodings where millions of people again have to flee. So this again, all these disasters, because we have been speaking of supply chain, they certainly are a threat also to supply chains. And if you just think of this little break in the Suez Canal for a few days, what it meant to the supply chain, so you can imagine what might happen if the disaster of the climate change would come true. And if you think of ports, if you think of the supply chain and areas of important productions. There are other dangers like the ice caps melting and new traffic lanes and so on. So what we have to do is we have to bring together, and that's what you did now in Dubai. We have to tackle these challenges by many stakeholders. To get involved. This is civil society. I think civil society is very important because they can put pressure on the governments. We need industry, governments, and intergovernmental organizations. And the intergovernmental organizations like the EU, the UN, OSCE, NATO, the African Union, they have put climate change as the biggest and longest lasting global challenge on their agenda. But what happens, and we see it now in Dubai, the focus is obviously mainly on discourse and rather on action. Discourse is necessary, but it's not sufficient. It's not sufficient to address these interrelated risks. And we need cooperation and dialogue. We need cooperation and dialogue even with non-like-minded states, so that we can tackle these problems. And one thing I want to mention also is, which is often neglected, climate change and gender equality. So climate change affects everybody and everyone, but not equally. Women are affected unproportionately high, as they are by war. They face higher risks and greater burdens due to existing roles and cultural norms. And therefore, they have to be at the negotiating and planning tables, but they also have to have decision power. And you all know the UN Resolution 1325. It is already 23 years old, and when you look at the pictures of Dubai just now, then you know where we are. So the topic of the UN climate conference now, COP28, was also under the title Climate Action Can't Wait. And I think this is something we really have to follow. Climate action just can't wait. And it will not be cost efficient to do something against it. We have to be aware that it will cost a lot of money. And that's why it is important that people from the finance sector also deal with it. Thank you.
Can I quick two-hander? I mean, the crowd in Dubai was actually very gender diverse.
Oh,
so
really?
The leaders, maybe not. So if you look at the picture of the leaders, it's true that it's not very encouraging.
One woman or two, maybe.
Probably
yes.
One is Meloni, maybe. So,
and von der Leyen.
Okay. But actually the crowd was very, very gender diverse. I was very encouraged by that. So very, very gender diverse. Yeah.
Yes, I hope they get decision power.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so thank you very much. So we are moving on. Lassina Zerbo, former Prime Minister Burkina Faso and Executive Secretary Emeritus of CTBTO from 2030 to 2021. So he will give us a bit a view from the Global South. The floor is yours.
Thank you. It's on? Yeah, thank you. And let me thank again Mark for his invitation to join the dialogue of continents. I think this is my second one. And I think it's a good platform to exchange ideas, try together to find solution, to reflect on what we think it's not going well, and then where we think the world needs an important transformation of existing structures, which is essential to adapt to the dynamics that we're seeing in our world today. So you're asking me to talk about the position of the Global South. I think I'll try and take it more general before I give my personal view from the South. Today, when I look at my generation, and we all wanted to work internationally. We wanted to study abroad, and we wanted to work on international institutions. But as I move around giving talks to different universities in the South, the youth is not interested anymore in working in international institutions because they think multilateralism is either dead or dying or not efficient, by all means. And you talk about climate change. I'm also coming from the COP28 in Dubai. I landed from there. Christine Muttonen mentioned the need for gender diversity. You mentioned that there is diversity. But I mean, if you look what's happening at the COP28, you have the green zone and the blue zone. Most of the high-level officials were at the blue zone. And then you have a lot of young people kept in the green zone and not having access to where the decision making is, and which is where I agree with Christina that we should open the platform for people to be able to come and help make a difference. So this difference that we see everywhere at the COP28 is the same difference that needs fairness in all aspects. If you take climate change, I was talking to some head of state who are coming with a firm position. Why do we have to pay for something we didn't do? I mean, that's a language that you heard from many head of state in Africa. And I'm trying to tell them the urgency in climate change has basically no father, meaning we shouldn't look for the responsible of the global warming. We should focus on the solution. And it's difficult to convince them because they see the imbalance between those who are not responsible for the carbon emission and that have to suffer the exigencies of the climate agenda, meaning asking them, for instance, to not mine or exploit the gas and oil that they're finding recently in their countries. You take Senegal, you take Nigeria is an oil country for a long time, and some of the emerging countries in oil, Chad, and then many others in Africa today. They're saying, why do you want to stop us from exploiting our oil? Because of those who have been polluting the planet for so many years. And this is where I think the solution, and I was glad that during this COP28, Raphael Grossi plus Belgium created this platform where they brought nuclear energy. And I personally believe that the way to get this imbalance between those who were polluting for so many years and what's happening today, it's the introduction of those small modular reactors that are becoming fashionable, not only fashionable, but more secure to help the developing country to emerge through industrial development. That will help them understand the need to use clean energy as they phase out slowly what the climate agenda is asking to do. If we don't do that, there will always be this difference between the South and the North, or East and West, with regard to climate change. But one of the small problems that I saw in the 20 countries that have launched this nuclear agenda at the COP28 is because those 20 countries didn't include China and Russia, who are the main, I would say, actors in the developing world with regard to nuclear energy. So how do you go about that? I think we're basically creating another imbalance because of geopolitical tension and reason, which are outside the fight that we see in the continent, in the South. And how do we listen to the South and then at the same time take into account what's happening in the North or what's happening West? And some young people will tell you today, what is West and what is North and what is South? I'm coming from a Lome Peace Forum a couple of weeks ago, and then there is a new agenda that came from a group of young people who are now questioning what is West and what is North and what is South. And then I was basically laughing when one came out during the discussion and said, but why do we have to believe that the sun is rising from the east? So I'm just giving those examples to say we got to be careful, we got to listen to people because it's now, I think that we have a dynamic that is basically there to contradict what's happening and what they used to be hearing. And there I wanted to offer one way of moving forward, which is the image of yesterday that I saw in Niger. The junta announced that they're stopping their cooperation with Europe, military cooperation of Europe, because Europe was helping in fighting terrorists in the three frontiers between Burkina, Mali, and Niger. And at the same time, the same day, after the announcement, you have the Deputy Minister of Defense of Russia, plus high-level officials of US who are coming, greeted by the junta, and then signing some accord agreement to move forward. So what is Europe in this game? So I'm saying this because we need, and Europe need, and whatever you call the West or the North, you need to get together and know exactly how you move forward with regard to what you call the global South. You cannot come divided and expect people to be united in listening to you. And that's why there's so much difference between my generation, for instance, and those who are behind us who are telling us, you've been listening to the West too much, and then we don't want to listen to you until you take our issues into account. So having said this, I won't go into non-proliferation disarmament because Christine mentioned all this, even if that's my main field. I wanted to give another point on the terrorism and the insecurity that's happening, especially in West Africa. Terrorism in Mozambique is completely different from terrorism in West Africa. And terrorism in Burkina Faso is different from what's happening in Mali, for a simple reason. In Burkina, which is at the border of the Sahel, what we call the Sahel, the terrorism comes from the fertile ground that the fight in Libya has created by bringing terrorists from the north who found in the nomadic population people, due to climate change, who can't keep their cattle the way they used to keep for so many years. Because when they want to move with the cattle, they find people who are cultivating where they should or they've been used to go to get water and then to get food for the cattle. So they can't do that anymore. They're finding ways. People tell them, you are a stranger, this is not your place. And that's how the fight starts between community. And in Burkina Faso today, terrorism is intra-community. You see people, not ideological. It has nothing to do with Islamism or whatever. It's people, because of poverty, and then they react to what's happening, and then they take guns because they think that's the only way for them to survive. And that's exactly what's happening. So until and unless this is understood, that difference is understood from the north and from the west, it would be difficult to deal with the issue of insecurity or terrorism in the Sahel region. What I wanted to bring maybe as possible impactful ideas are some concepts that many of you have talked about. I heard some this morning as well. We talk about multilateral adaptability. I think that's a must. Until we adapt the multilateral institution to the reality of the world today, it will be difficult for us to do anything. Tech-infused diplomacy. People have talked about technology and innovation into diplomacy, into partnership. That's very important, and it's a must as well. Economic inclusivity. I mean, I think that the world is forcing us to do that anyway. And we had AFIS, which is the African Industrial Platform Finance, the Industrial Finance Platform that was held in Lomé 3 weeks ago. And then cultural exchange and understanding. We need a better understanding between this world that is changing, this youth that is changing, and then to see how together we can help deal with conflict resolution through the innovation that I've just mentioned. And then, more importantly, youth engagement and leadership. Because youth engagement, you talk to them today at different universities, they're looking for role models and then they don't find. And that's one of the big problems that the youth are facing, at least in the continent where I'm from. And then there is a dose of ethical artificial intelligence that need to be put into any partnership today and international relation for us to be better understanding towards each other. Public-private partnership, we talk about it. And then last but not the least, that resilience and adaptive governance. And when I talk about resilience and adaptive government, that brings me to a concept that was discussed today. Where do we put the cursor of democracy? And where is democracy? What is democracy? And what is the West and what is the South? Democracy is for all. For me, there is no African democracy or Western democracy. Democracy is the word that was done for the people, by the people, with the people, or you name it. So I think we need to reflect on all this and then see how we can face. And then as I look at my friend, and every time when I talk about any topic, I think of him because he said we have to bring that human touch to everything we do. The human touch is important. With no human touch, we can do what we want. We'll face more and more difficulty. And then I will end by that. Thank you. Jonathan, I'm basically paraphrasing you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And so we move on to Mario Holzner, Executive Director, Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies. This is the institute which is our expert on Central and Eastern and Southeastern Europe. Mario, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So the background is really the region we are living here and everything that is east to it, but we do more and more studies on the European Union in general, on Europe as a continent and also beyond. And here I would like now to shift the focus to this European Union perspective, which really is something like kind of a weak confederation which is mainly obsessed with its own problems, knows very little of, you just mentioned about Western Africa, for instance, and with a few exceptions is really looking just at its own difficult and complicated setup, which indeed there is a lot to do. Nevertheless, there is a world beyond the borders of the European Union, and what we did was recently study together with the Bertelsmann Foundation on a way geoeconomics of the European Union in its neighborhood. In all the neighboring countries, we analyzed more than 60 indicators of interconnectivity in various areas between the EU and its neighboring countries, and we looked in a comparative way to partners and competitors, so the US, Russia, China, and basically the general story was that in most of the traditional sectors, like in trade, in FDI and similar things, the European Union is still basically the only game in town in all the neighboring countries to the east, but also to the south, so the whole Mediterranean, Middle East and the Eastern Partnership countries, the Western Balkans. Once you shift, for instance, to indicators of technology, the thing looks a little bit different. Europe is still important, but if we look, for instance, at the share of high-tech imports that these countries have from Europe compared to its partners and competitors, we see that the share of China is increasing massively and is reaching the European shares more recently. So this clearly says also something about the lack of a proper high-tech industry in Europe compared to other places in the world. And so on. So there are some of these specific areas where indeed there is a geoeconomic competition, and this is something that at least EU policymakers should take into consideration. Another maybe not so typical indicator of interconnectivity that we looked at is migration. And considering that Europe in general, and particularly Central and Eastern Europe, is from a demographic point of view a massively aging continent, and that so far for Western Europe, migration meant particularly people from Eastern Europe coming to the West. This is over. If you look at the UN forecasts for the population change, particularly the population in the working age population, over the next few decades, then some countries of Central Eastern Europe will have declines of 10, 20, up to 30% of the working age population. So this will be a huge problem for those societies themselves, and directly and indirectly also for the rest of Europe. So where are potentially migrants coming? And migration, similar like trade or FDI, is also very much related to distance. And so the next places where you still have population growth is, for instance, Northern Africa, And I don't see any European politician who has developed some kinds of plans how to deal with this issue and how to maybe do it this time better and have maybe a migration policy that also helps the sending countries, not just to lose their brightest young people, but maybe have some sorts of circular migration schemes. And there are plans, but nobody is really trying to do something about it at the moment, at least. So I think this is one area. This is the status quo. This is a little bit about trends. Then maybe a word about our partners and competitors, so to speak, and what they have been doing the last decade and a half, I would say. I think Europe was extremely naive, particularly if it is about the twin transition, green and digital transition. Coming late to the party, we are now copying industrial policy that China has been implementing since 10, 20 years. And also the US, I would say not only recently with the IRA, who gave, by the way, this acronym to that policy, it would be interesting to know. There are some who claim that the US actually never gave up industrial policy and that they just made others not to use that term and not to think in terms of industrial policy. So again, from this perspective, I think Europe is late. Europe was naive. We had certain advantages in some of the green technologies. We have completely lost out in this area. And I will come back to that point again. Maybe just as an add-on, I think it is interesting to see how the rest of the world, if we look away from Europe and the US, how they think about the future of the world, of their own future. We saw this meeting of the BRICS, where they invited additional countries to join the BRICS Plus. Now, whatever it is, it's probably still rather some kind of a meeting and discussion platform. It nevertheless shows that there is an interest of what I think Ivan Krastev called the middle powers of our days, not to be on the plate, but to sit at the table where their own future is being discussed. And hence I think this is understandable that several of these rather big countries actually want to have a certain saying on their something to say about their own future. If we analyze the economic impact, the difference between the current BRICS and the BRICS Plus, I mean, it's not really a big change. Apart from oil production, you don't see a big change in the overall GDP, in the overall population size, and so on. And in essence, if you go further in the details and look at particularly processing of materials that are important for the green transition, it's really a China story and not a BRICS or BRICS Plus story. Some materials, also Russia, still as the world's biggest country in terms of land area, is also important. So in one way or another, both Europe and the US will have to find ways to cooperate also in the future, probably both with China and Russia on some grounds of actual the physical world that finds an input into the digital and the green transition. And maybe a last word on European industrial policy. It's still difficult to discuss it with some policymakers. It's not anymore a word that we are not allowed to use. I think if you look at the research departments of international organizations, also of parts of the European Commission, then actually you have a new generation of people who particularly were socialized with the global financial crisis, who have made very concrete experiences, who are maybe from Spain or Italy also, where poverty in the wake of all the developments that happened afterwards was far-reaching, and where you really see a paradigm shift. And reading IMF reports of today, I mean, this is just a completely different thing. It's not anymore comparable to what you could read maybe 20 years ago. And in that sense, I think we have to go on thinking in very hands-on directions. And it was mentioned, we don't have really time to lose anymore. We are really behind the curve on all of these issues. Typically, you would like, from a theoretical point of view, to have a particular measure targeting one particular goal. I think we don't have the time for that anymore. We need basically measures that target the green transition issues, the digital transition issues, and at the same time, social and issues of basically having the broad public supporting and giving legitimacy to all the policies that happen. Just would like to mention that, I mean, for instance, the United Kingdom was actually very much gaining from being part of the single market, yeah? But only in the aggregate. If you zoomed in, then basically it was London and a few cities in the south of England that gained. Wide parts of northern England, eastern, central England just lost, and these were obviously the people who were voting for Brexit. Yeah? So whatever we do, we have to think about this political economy of these measures at the same time. So it becomes more complicated. The trade-off between efficiency and security is clearly visible, and there is, I think, a paradigmatic shift from this absolute efficiency oriented policies towards policies that take into account security in its broadest sense. This is energy security, it's military security, it's social security, it's really security in the most general, I think, sense that you can think of. And maybe as a really final word, I would like to say also that in that sense, we have to think out of the box. We have to see whether we also not just change certain framework conditions, regulations, certain tax, certain tariffs here and there. I think we really have to go in very concrete fields into the issues, have clear investment plans with milestones for the industry, push the industry to fulfill certain investments with regard particularly to the green and the digital transition, and with regard to the public sector also. It is, I think, so obvious that we need so much public investment, and hence, I mean, the German discussion at the moment is so far away from any reality that it is embarrassing actually to look at. And I really hope that the ruling of the Constitutional Court in Germany will lead to significant changes in the way that Germany will be handling its fiscal policy in the future. Because if Germany, as the biggest country in the European Union, is failing on this, we are really doomed to lose out in this important structural change, this important phase of the structural change that we are facing. And in that sense, while I can have little overlap with the German finance minister, I have to say, I think recently he claimed that actually energy transition is not necessarily something about even maybe ecological issues, but it's actually a security issue. I think it's very true. One can again interpret security in the most broadest way, but if there is no public investment in energy, and I'm speaking particularly about the grids, both the high voltage grids that should connect the north and south where wind and solar energy can be connected, but also the low voltage networks that need to connect the decentralized producers of this wind and solar energy, then we are lagging behind massively. And if I look at net investment of the public sector in Germany, it's incredible. Basically, it's around zero for half a century. The German municipalities have disinvested since 20 years. I mean, this is incredible. And if you drive around in that central country of Europe, you will see how the motorways are in a bad shape, how the schools are in a catastrophic shape. I mean, that's not acceptable, and how the railway system is. I think the low voltage lines were even reduced by 14% in the last half a decade or so. I mean, this is just impossible. We really have to make a massive change in the European Union for the interests of the European Union, but in a way also for the broader interests of the whole world with regard to these important transitions.
So thank you very much. Just one comment. Public investment in Germany, it's really was really bad, and they even invited me as an Austrian to a German government expert group on infrastructure financing. And the Germans are really desperate if we invite an Austrian to a German government expert group. But now we go on, and we have Ferdinando Nelli Feroci, President Istituto Affari Internazionali, and he told me he's working also on scenario analysis. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, if I may, I would continue along the same lines of the previous speaker, looking at the changes in the international scenario from a European perspective. And I would start from what used to be a traditional paradigm when it comes to relations between Europe and European Union with its main partners in the world. We were assuming that, in a sense, the European Union could progress and proceed successfully in its integration process thanks to three dependencies, in a sense, because Europe was dependent on Russia from cheap energy supplies, was and is dependent on the United States of America for its own security, and was still is dependent on China for trade and investment. Now, my take is that this paradigm is obsolete to a certain extent, or at least in the middle of a transition. If you look at Russia and supplies of energy, fossil energy, what happened with the war is a very important lesson. So we had to reduce drastically dependence from energy supply from Russia. We did it quite successfully. This was a situation which affected some countries in Europe more than others. I'm thinking in particular of Germany and Italy, of course. But in a sense, one of the first decisions we took as a reaction to Russia's aggression against Ukraine was to not only to sanction with a number of sanction packages, up to 11 so far, but also to reduce the purchase of oil and gas from Russia. And in a certain sense, to move towards a sort of decoupling of our economies from economy of Russia. If you look at China, there are many other lessons of this war that I would like to draw your attention. Not only the reduction of dependencies on supplies of energy, but also the need to increase our competitiveness, to reduce other dependencies that came out very clearly, not only from that lesson, but also from the COVID, particularly when it comes to certain critical raw materials, to microchips, to enabling technologies, all areas in which European Union is not sufficiently competitive. And also to start to think to develop an industrial policy, something which was almost unthinkable a few years ago. Now it's back again in the agenda of the European Union, even though so far without concrete results, because it's very difficult to actually agree on some concrete measures to implement an industrial policy at the European level. We've seen this in particular when it comes to the question of how to fund, how to finance an industrial policy at the European level. China is the second big issue that I'd like to refer to. We used to consider, basically until a few years ago, China as a land of opportunities, a marvelous partner for our trade relations, a good partner for investment both ways. But at some point, we realized that China was more than that. And when it was the European Commission that first defined an attempt to draw up a common strategy for European Union towards China, and the attempt of the Commission was that of squaring the circle by defining China at the same time a partner, a competitor, and a systemic rival. We are still there in the sense we're trying to put this triple definition into concrete actions and to define measures that would enable us to deal with China in such a manner that it would continue to be a partner while considering that it can also constitute a threat to our security to a certain extent. And in doing that, we have to take into account also the attitude of the US administration and US in general towards China. So we have to be careful to define a strategy that would not be in competition with that of the United States, and that would consider opportunities that China continue to offer to the European Union, but also the challenges that China is putting to our system in terms of national security of our own countries. Last but not least, we used to be totally reliant on our US ally for our own security, and this is one of the key of the success of the integration process in Europe. And so far this has well functioned. Thinking in particular of the experience of these last years with the democratic administration in Washington, with which the European Union have dealt with very well, with an enormous alignment of position, in particular when it comes to the decision we took as a reaction against Russia's aggression to Ukraine. But if you look in perspective to the possibility that something may change in the US, as it is very likely, with another president, with another administration, whose priority will be completely different when it comes to relations with the EU, when it comes to the future of NATO, when it comes to transatlantic partnership, I think that in the near future, Europe will have to be more serious in assuming commitments for its own security. We've not been able to do it so far, for reasons that are very well known to most of us, but I think that it will become urgent for Europe, I'm afraid, in the future, to be more consistent with commitments that we have announced but never been able to implement for our own security. We're doing something when it comes to economic security, and I meant a number of measures that have been either adopted or proposed to increase our own economic security. But when it comes to hard security, military security, we're very far from having achieved concrete results. So I see these as the three main challenges ahead of Europe in the near future. And these are challenges that have to do, in a sense, also with the global governance, because these are the main partners of Europe, now and in the future, inevitably, with which we will have to deal in order to be able to respond to the global challenges like climate change, which was mentioned many times before my intervention, but also other challenges are key in an agenda to reform the international system in order to make it more consistent with the need of an efficient and effective multilateral system, with the need to revitalize international institutions that at this present stage are very much delegitimized and that we incredibly loss of credibility, and with the need to re-establish rules of the game in international relations that are necessary to ensure peace stability to the world, which is not the case right now. So we stop here for now. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Now we are coming to our last speaker, last but not least, Thomas Wieser. He's now a senior fellow Bruegel, but he has had a distinguished career in the Austrian Finance Ministry and also at the European Union, where he was chairing the Economic and Finance Committee, but also the Eurogroup working group. So he's, I would say, the Austrian who knows the EU probably best. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Franz. Thanks to Mark for inviting me, organizing, also to Ambassador Briggs for hosting, co-hosting, co-organizing this event. And when looking at the program, I noted Mark's optimism in calling this session the changing nature of global cooperation instead of the changing nature of global confrontation. So on that note of optimism, I was asking myself, cooperation between whom? Cooperation of everybody with everybody, or cooperation between blocks of like-minded, so-called like-minded countries, or cooperation within blocks. And this is more than just logic or metaphysics, because if we go back over the last half century, even more than half century, many of us are deploring the breakdown of the so-called rules-based system. But what was the rules-based system? We say, it was the WTO, and it was people following the IMF or not, and et cetera, et cetera. But the rules-based system was something that was produced by aging white men around the North Atlantic. And as long as we had what in retrospect one would probably call a unipolar system of Western democracies and countries that were more or less aligned with them, it was fairly easy to follow the rules. Some because they'd written them, others because they were under the security umbrella of the United States, and others because they were too weak or too poor to contradict or not follow the rules. And then there was behind the pale, if you wanted, large parts of the globe which are incredibly important today, which were simply not integrated into or hardly integrated into the world economic system. So if we deplore the breakdown of the rules-based system and the institutions built around them, then we have to realize we probably need a different set of rules and a different set of institutions if we want to produce something which is more or less universal buy-in. As an extreme example, think of the Security Council, where the post-1945 world is very well represented, but not this millennium. So that is why I have a certain skepticism on sort of rebooting the system and going back to where we were 20 years ago. And maybe a few words on economic integration and rules, etc. And I think Europe is a good example of how the closer integrated you are economically, the more you require common rules in order to trade seamlessly with each other. And the more and more integrated you become, the more you realize, that's Europe's story of post-57, the more and more integrated you become and the more you're following rules, the more you need institutions that produce these rules. And then you get more and more closer and closer integrated. Then you need institutions that adjudicate of how member state participating countries are actually following these rules or not. And that is when you come to a situation where, as in the European Union, over many areas, you have binding rules ultimately binding rules on many issues that govern our economic behavior, but also our social behavior. And that is when people start saying, holy cow, I've given up my sovereignty. There are two different reactions to this issue of sovereignty and international rules and institutions. The one is Brexit, which has been mentioned already today, where it goes in one direction. It goes in the other direction if you take the case of Austrian monetary policy, at the danger of offending Franz. Up until Austria joined in the euro, the European system of central banks, there was one function of the Austrian central bank, which was in a small room where there was a phone. And of the 1,000 people in the Austrian central bank, there was one person manning the phone, or womaning the phone, as the case may be. And the task of this person was twice a day called Frankfurt and said, do I have to do anything to maintain the 7-to-1 exchange rate? And the other 999 were doing other things. I'm sure, very important things. So by joining the euro, we gave up formal sovereignty, but we gained partial participation in a supranational institution, and therefore I would argue we gained in sovereignty. And so Brexit and the euro are for me the big difference between what I would call nominal sovereignty and real sovereignty. Brexit was very much about nominal sovereignty, so very much things that are argued by constitutional lawyers, which tend to be normally centered around Karlsruhe in Germany. And the real sovereignty is something where you recognize that as a small country in a globalized world, you've lost de facto most of your economic sovereignty. And if you participate in something larger, you are shielded from the vagaries of international catastrophes and structural shifts. You give up nominal sovereignty, but you regain a part of real sovereignty. And just as a footnote, I tend to sort of try to imagine what Austria would be like outside the European Union when these winds of change are blowing. What would it be like with an autonomous trade policy? What would it be with still the Austrian shilling somehow linked to the euro or not? We'd need more than one person around the telephone in the central bank, let alone what would it do to our foreign and security policy. So what about the role of the EU there? If we agree, or as I would argue, that under the umbrella of the European Union we have gained an element of real sovereignty, but how are we utilizing this? And I will not talk about how I think Austria utilizes EU membership. That would take us too long, but I would follow up on what Mario was saying a bit. Has Europe really stepped up to the plate? Has it pulled its weight in global affairs or not? And that would beg the question, does Europe want to play a role? But in these times when we've moved away from a unipolar to a possibly polypolar world, I would argue that either you're a player or you get played with, and so that's the choice that you have. And Austria is a small member state, but on the global scale, Italy, Germany, France, they're not large countries. They're at very best medium-sized countries. And all by themselves, they would end up between a rock and a hard place. So being part of a larger group of countries definitely offers economies of scale and possibly scope as well. However, there are 27 of us. And heterogeneity has gone up over the decades, and you could argue that the real bump in heterogeneity came with the enlargement from 15 member states to what is now 27. And the really important things in life are either de facto or de jure decided in the European Union by unanimity. Sometimes de jure, sometimes de facto. Think of migration. There was a vote with qualified majority on migration, but the member states simply, they said, this is too important. I can't really, I will not implement what we agreed upon. So we are faced with something of an impossibility of reaching rapidly, let alone rapidly, important decisions. Mainly, I would say, because of the unanimity requirements. And think of where the US would be if you had unanimity requirements between the 50 member states and the District of Columbia in the US. They would be in a different place. So, as I've said, common decision-making with or without future enlargements has gone from difficult to nearly impossible. And that leaves us with uncomfortable choices. So either we don't have common approaches at all, which leaves us exactly with the small member state syndrome, the small member states like Germany and France, let alone the wee little bits called Austria, as they said in 1918, the rest is Austria. Or alternatively, we have constant unanimity requirements, continuous unanimity requirements, which leads more or less to a similar kind of blockage on the global scale. Third possibility, we change the treaty to have qualified majority voting on a vast majority of issues, but you need unanimity to change to qualified majority voting, so you're up the creek without a paddle. And the last choice or possibility is that we move to what we've called in a couple of papers which we produced at Bruegel, the Europe of clubs or Europe of overlapping clubs, which cannot be a Europe à la carte, but where over major policy areas, countries join each other and say, we give up our national veto, we give up requirements of unanimity and pool our resources in order to have a voice at the global scale, in order to be a player and not be played with. These things are very difficult. Think of security and foreign policy. These are at the heart of the constitutions of many member states. So it's not easy. This is where countries really give up sovereignty. This is probably a larger step than joining the European Union. It's a much larger step than giving up your national currencies. But to put it starkly, these are the choices that we are facing. If we don't change what we do, how we do, then Europe will just be a compositum mixtum of small and slightly larger member states faced with global confrontation or semi-cooperation where it will not have a voice. And that has shitty economic consequences as well. So there we go. Agenda for the next 20 years.
Thank you very much. Just one comment on your argument about monetary policy. One of our strongest
I knew it would get him.
In the run-up to the referendum on EU membership was, our monetary policy is made now in Frankfurt. This will not change. It will be made in Frankfurt. But the difference is, before the Bundesbank told us what we had to do, and now we have the same voting right as the Germans, which played very well with the Austrian public.
With the proviso that you didn't know at that stage that it would be in Frankfurt, but absolutely. And to add insult to injury, the Austrians had to pay for the phone call to Frankfurt.
We are having now the option that you can react to some of or comment on some of the interventions if you want.
Okay. I'll answer them.
Yeah,
first,
one word, if I may, on the last remark by Thomas Wieser. On the need for Europe to revise some of its internal functioning if it wants to play a role, an actual role in the world scene. But not only that, if it wants to deliver public goods that are useful for our own country. So I think we have an opportunity now. And if I may, the opportunity is the prospect of a new round of enlargement. So probably in a couple of weeks' time, the European Council will decide to open negotiations with Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova to relaunch the process of enlargement with the countries of the Western Balkans. But unless one or two countries will oppose, I hope this is not going to be the case. But if we want to be successful in this further round of enlargement, I think that we need to adjust something in our own functioning. And this could be an opportunity. So I'm not saying it's going to be easy. It's going to be very complicated. And there are things that can be done without revising the treaties, that it's a situation that Thomas reminded us requires unanimity. Some things can be done without revising the treaties, which is probably the best options. And I see mainly 4 areas that need to be looked at. Not only the functioning of institutions and decision-making processes that you mentioned, Thomas, in particular the rule of unanimity, very complex decision to take, but also at least 3 more areas. One is the functioning of some common policies, particularly those that require an enormous amount of money from the EU budget. If you don't revise, for instance, the agricultural policy of the cohesion and structural fund policies, you won't be able to reach the agreement of others. They will lose money as a consequence of the accession to the EU of a country like Ukraine. So this is one key question that needs to be looked at quite quickly. Another question is the dimension and the functioning of the EU common budget. As it is not sufficient. We've seen this on many occasions. We need more own resources. We need more money to finance and fund activities that are necessary to make the European Union capable to respond to expectations of its citizens. And the 4th area that needs to be looked at very carefully before getting in more new partners is the rules that are there to ensure that the rule of law is actually implemented. We have had this experience with some new members, relatively new members, with which we are having a very complex relation these days. And I think that we have to plan in advance better functioning rules that would ensure respect for the rule of law for all countries, not only for the new ones. So I think I'm saying this because I see the new round of enlargement also as an opportunity to move ahead with some important and in any case, necessary internal reforms. Thank you.
Yeah, I have one more comment on your statement about the Austria seat in the governing council, just to kind of be a bit more precise. I mean, the governors are there in personal capacity. So, for example, the Austrian governor does not represent Austria. It's an important point to me. So the real weight of Austria is the weight of Austria in the euro economy. That was matter. But the national governors don't represent the national interest. That's important to remember.
You're fully right, because we are in a personal capacity, and but in the referendum we said our governor will get the same voting right, and we didn't distinguish with. In the public, we don't understand it.
Yeah, sure.
I would like to follow up on what was said before. So, historically seen, big accession waves have been exactly correlated with reforms in the setup of the European Union. I mean, that's exactly the point where things like that happen, because you have to do certain changes. Otherwise, it's not possible to actually even, or it's just the best occasion, basically, to do these changes of the setup. And I think in that sense also, the regatta principle that we had now more recently for the EU accession, I think we can forget about it. I mean, there is no way how we can first have Serbia and later on Albania. Or we really have to do everything at the same time, more or less as we did it in 2004. Maybe with a staged accession system and so on, but in general, some sort of a Big Bang scenario. And basically it will be more difficult than it was before, that's clear, but it was already quite difficult with Romania and Bulgaria. Allegedly, people who have been participating in those, let's call them negotiations, and claimed that basically the people from the German foreign ministry were helping to write the things that the Romanians, in theory, or Bulgarians should have done themselves. And this will be even more the case in the Western Balkan countries, where you have partly city-states, so to speak, of less than 2 million inhabitants, maybe even less than 1 million in one case, where just the simple administrative capacity is not here to really fully be responsible for the whole takeover of the acquis communautaire. If we don't do that, I fear that we will see a continuation of what some people claim to be proxy wars. So whatever happens in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East, some say these are proxy wars of a coming Cold War 2.0. And do we really want to have that to continue along all these fault lines, so to speak, from the Baltic Sea all the way to the Strait of Malacca? What happens if China will have some nuclear warheads in Serbia? What happens if the Kosovo war finds a second revival and so on? I mean, these are all scenarios we really want to avoid, and this really goes on along this whole line of a potential Cold War 2.0.
Yeah, if I may, not maybe a stupid question, but I'll ask it anyway. I mean, listening to Thomas just now on, I tend to agree with Thomas that one has to be careful when you start thinking about enlarging Europe, because the image that I see, it's like you are in a boat, you are 27, and then the boat is cracking, and then you say the solution is to bring 10 more or 15 more. If you don't fix the cracks, how can you bring 10 more? I think you will sink. And my position is, I've briefed as when I was executive secretary of the CTBTO, I've briefed the European Parliament both in Strasbourg and in Brussels. And I was shocked to see that you have to translate everything in the 27, or I think at the time 27 languages, or I don't know how many, I said 20-something languages before you can even agree to a text. And that every single person has to say yes before you move on. So if you don't solve that issue, when the rest of the world, if you were talking about comparing the United States is one language, okay? Language will help people to be unified. And if I take a country, Burkina Faso, where you have, 70 to 80 different languages, we speak the three main, and then everybody is yet to try and learn about those three languages to help people understand each other. Because when I was young, or even a few years ago, if I didn't speak several languages, my wife and I will only communicate in French or in English, which are both foreign language from Burkina Faso. So in Europe, for me, I'm just throwing something, I'm not European. I'm just giving from my experience in terms of languages. Maybe instead of going for so many languages, is to focus on the main languages within Europe. I won't cite them because I don't want problem, okay? You choose 1, 2, or 3, and then you say those are the main languages of Europe, and then we have to go for it. I think that will help bring people together to start with, and then to agree on issues before you start translating in every single languages, because if we were doing it, for instance,
in my experience, English is now completely dominant. So I think everything happening in Europe is in English now. I think 10, 15 years ago, people still spoke a bit of French, but now everything is in English. I don't know, maybe
still you have to translate everything.
No, I'm not.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if in the bank I'm not sure we translate, but the fact is only there is a bit of job for the translators, which is probably a waste. I agree, but in matter of fact, everything is in English. Everybody speaks English. Yeah.
If it is, it's fine. And then you'll ask the question, why English and not German? Because the German is more spoken in Europe than the population. The German
very difficult language.
So, but anyway, it's a very difficult language. I spend enough time here to know it's a difficult. The point that I want to make is that when I hear about enlarging Europe, my questioning or stupid questioning is that, okay, are you guys mature enough in terms of your institutional framework and all what you have to enlarge again, and then to not face the situation of unanimity that Thomas is talking about? That's a question that I think you should ask yourself and then see, regardless of whether I'm not judging a country coming in, I'm talking in a practical way what to do so that you can inspire people to say that this is the model that is working, and then they want to do the same. I guess we're trying to do that with the African Union, and then we're yet to find a way where people can even move within the whole of Africa without visas. And there are 2 countries who have started. I think it's Rwanda. I'm advising President Kagame on many issues, and I want to give one example, what he said. I told him, while in South Africa they're fighting against the West African that are coming, or even the Zimbabwean that are coming in South Africa, they want to chase them because they think unemployment is due to them. In Rwanda, a much smaller country, it's visa-free for the whole of Africa. So I asked President Kagame, but how do you manage? You're a tiny little country, South Africa is much bigger, and then they're facing this immigration issue. So his answer was pretty simple. He said, look, everyone can come to Rwanda, but after 3 months, if you have nothing to do, it means that you have no way to stay. And why? Because there's no informal platform where somebody can go and get sweets from a bigger guy and then go on the street and then start selling. The country is so well organized that there are places where you sell sweets, there are places where you sell fruit, there are places where you fix cars, and then there's no informal setting when people can come and then find ways of living. I think that was quite striking to me. And then I start thinking, why we lack discipline in some of the African countries? It's this informal platform that is there without discipline that is creating the problem that we have in immigration. And that leads me to another point, and that will be my last point with regard to Europe versus Europe partnership with Africa and what the world is showing us today. If I'm in Europe, and if I connect more with European, when I switch off TV, I want to see the Champions League in football, because that's a European champion that I've seen as a student. So that's what connects me to my friend that I've been to school with. But today, you've made the situation too complicated for African students to come because you fix and mix the type of immigration that you have to face. And yet, people in the US, people in China, people in Turkey, your neighbors, and people in Canada are more open to welcome students from the continent and then to see them making a difference in their countries. Africa is 75% less than 25 years old people, young people. So in 5 years or in 10 years, when those people leave the country, who do you want them to turn to? They will turn their back to Europe, and that will be sad. You can enlarge yourself, be as big you are, you can be as big as you are. If you don't have partners that could help you sustain what you do, you will fail. So that will be my last point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. And then I would open to the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much for this insight. I think we have to turn on and have an open eye and open ears for the young people especially. And when you talk about Africa, then of course this is also a topic, for example, for I know it from I know it from students that they have difficulties to come. I know it from artists that have difficulties to come to Europe. It's almost impossible. They want to come and perform. They want to have an exchange of culture, and it's not possible. But I wanted to just to come back to what was said, that decisions are so difficult, and it's so difficult to make quick and rapid decisions. So this is not only true for the EU, this is true obviously for the COP28 as well. So when it comes to climate change, and time is really running out, so I think we have to focus on communities and regions rather than on the whole system if there are no decisions possible, because the communities are the first ones who have to react when there is a disaster. And for example, in the area I come from, in the south of Austria, so they started to have a cooperation now with Slovenia and Italy, so with Friuli and the part of Slovenia, because the flooding is the same and the heavy rainfalls are the same. So the question is, how can you work together quickly? How can you make decisions quickly? and this is very important, but of course what we have, that there are those networks, and they are working very well, and networks of communities that share best practices and so on, and they include enterprises and organizations and civil societies, and try to find out tailored programs how to combat climate change or how to be resilient. And but of course, coming back to money, we need to get funding flowing directly to those local communities. And I think this is very important, as long as we don't have the bigger solution, and when we lack really decisions that take so long.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I would open it now to the floor. The first has been Ernst Schmidt. He has behind.
Sorry for up. I'm not an expert on Africa, but we had a look last week on the Mama Africa in Dubai. And I just want to go back a certain period. We have discussed, and this is a question to you, the topic of why you can't put some water out of the Congo into the Chad Lake, for an example. Which capabilities you would need to do it. When we are saying this is an issue of private, where's my money, where's the project, and where's my money. And this would lead to certain activities instead of fiddling around about whatever paperwork. And we have in Dubai addressed this with Sheikh Ahmed Maktoum in 2014. I have presented the Africa this model in our annual supply chain logistics group in Dubai, where I was a founding member. And this would be something, because Austria could give much more support, because we built for Gaddafi a steel plant. We built for other also steel plants and this type of thing. When I think on our what we have, industrial engineering and this type of things, including maybe some financial, which we did also together with Siemens, for an example. So the question is on you, please. What is there something about the status getting some water from the to the Chad Lake?
Thank you.
Yeah. Should I? Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your question. I think instead of getting water from the Congo to the Chad Lake, is to work towards a framework where the Chad Lake would not go drastically dry every year. And that's the effect of climate change. But what is causing this? Because when I was mentioning terrorism in the Sahel, the shrinking of the Chad Lake is one of the big reasons of terrorism in those frontiers. So what do we do about that? Economic development in the region, for people to not go and destroy trees all the way and then all the time. I mean, when you go to Chad or you go into the Sahel region, you have less trees, but you see people with wood in their head, kilometers of people walking and walking. So, but where that come from? Lack of education, lack of understanding that cutting trees or cutting this or burning the forest or doing this will create conditions for drought and so forth. So one of the things we should do, and that will, we can go long and long in this discussion, that will link me again to the concept of democracy in Africa. So how do people understand what is good and what is not good for them if they don't even understand their environment and how that environment fits with the rest of the world? So we need a level or a minimum of education with the young people, but not only with young people, but also with adults, so that they understand what's happening. Many people in Africa or in West Africa or in the Sahel region don't even feel, because unless you show the satellite image that is completely unbelievable, to see how in so less years, the Chad Lake has shrunk. I mean, people would not believe it because they will leave. I know they do market gardening every year. They don't realize that they're getting closer and closer and deeper and deeper. They're building houses because there is no framework where you say, like in Europe, you have this small forest and then this is protected and no one come. And then I heard somebody talking about dictators in the morning. Even dictators cannot go and tell them, don't cultivate here or don't build here, because people want water. I mean, if you don't find water or you don't have boreholes where you live, you'll go towards the lake to get water. And then they grab water there and then they move and then, the lake is shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. And then when people come from north, from Libya, they find fertile ground with those people who are facing poverty and then lack of water. And that's where the extremist violence is coming from in that region. So getting water from the Congo will go, the infrastructure, the price of the infrastructure to do that, I think you can balance this out with creating the condition around Lake Chad Chad Lake to solve the issue that you talk about. But I wanted to add as well, you're right in saying, I've lived in Austria long enough to know what type of development aid, which is different, for instance, that a country like Austria is doing with regard to a country like Burkina Faso. You will be surprised. There's one, it's wiiw, the institute. Do you know that we have a school in Burkina Faso and the cooperation came from a priest who started working on this school before even the independence? And you have probably 250 guys from Burkina Faso who are living in Austria, but they're all coming from this school because they came back after working to do university, and then that's how they create the link between Austria and the country. So you have a different way of dealing with my country, for instance. When you hear youth in Burkina Faso talking about rejecting the West, they don't say, for instance, rejecting Austria. They don't say rejecting Germany. They don't say rejecting Swedish. So, but it's the problem today in Africa is nothing than the attitude of certain leaders towards the countries and how the young people feel it. And that's the only problem. So I don't want to name, you probably know who and how I'm talking about, but this, until we change our way of addressing those issues, like you're saying, you sensitive to this issue, but how many people in Europe know that if you don't fix this issue, you'll have more migrants coming from south to north? So let's see how we can invest in those type of activity, how we can help education, people understanding why and how the Chad Lake is shrinking, and then why it is important to fix this issue so that we get water, because it can be fixed. It can be fixed.
Okay, thank you. You wanted to?
You going to hold it? Okay. At least 60% of our oxygen comes from the phytoplankton in the oceans. That's not a political statement, it's a fact. We are destroying species minimally at 1,000 times the evolutionary base rate. If the human experiment were to stop, the ants will be just fine, and the bees will be just fine. But if we destroy the bees or the ants, we have a few months and the human experiment ends. Our main institutions that are causing this are institutions of law, de jure institutions, states and multinational corporations. Their purposes are stated in positive law. The states of Europe were created to address a problem of the 17th century. How do we separate Protestants and Catholics from destroying each other? So the charter, the purpose, the de jure instruments that created the modern states were to separate people. But I don't think that's the problem we're facing in the 21st century, in the Anthropocene, as it's called. There's no group of states that can protect the oceans. There's no group of states that can protect the climate. There's no group of states that can protect biodiversity or the next pandemic. These are global issues that are systemic, that can't be met piecemeal. Certainly can't be met if our economic model is based on perpetual growth without reference to what are called, in general accounting principles, externalities. Externalities, that our financial statements relate to finance but not the real world. And our states were founded on principles that are inappropriate to dealing with the problems that we face today. So I would contend that we need to have some very serious discussions about how we sustain the human experiment. And that, for example, our bond and stock markets, when they report to the public, they only report the effect of markets on the corporation and the corporation on markets. They don't report on the effect in the real world. And the notion of sovereignty, and I'm going to plug a book and then shut up. Thinking of this problem several years ago, myself and Senator Alan Cranston and Mikhail Gorbachev and Jane Goodall and Jonathan Schell did a book called The Sovereignty Revolution. And we argued that sovereignty is created by people to express values and to address problems. And that dealing with global issues that are systemic is not ever a diminution of sovereignty. It's the expression of sovereignty that begins with people. So the UN last year started a program called Human Security for All, designed to put human beings first and states second. In other words, states have to put protecting human beings, which are part of the web of life, first, and change the paradigm of our thinking. I'm sorry, but I just think that we're just like ants on a log talking to each other about to go over a waterfall, and we have to really start thinking fundamentally like we did in the 17th century. There was slaughter in this part of the world then. It's much worse today, because as the tensions exacerbate and weapons of mass destruction, nukes are 1930s physics, 1940s technology. Science hasn't stopped. There'll be more weapons created by less people for less money to destroy more things faster if we don't change the paradigm. Thank you.
I think it was more a comment than a question.
I just want to say that I completely agree with that. You know, the Westphalian order should be totally. The Westphalian order is called this order based on sovereign states. It's called the Westphalian order, and this Westphalian, yeah, should be revisited. And personally, for example, I think that one document has to be abolished. It's totally idiotic. Is the passport. You know, I think the passport will just be abolished. It's the most stupid and idiotic thing that exists. So if there is a campaign to abolish the passport, I will be the first signature. So,
but then you have to abolish the borders.
Yeah. Not necessarily. ID card should be enough, in my view. So if you have an ID card, they know you are. You don't need the passport. Is a document the state authorizes you to travel, which is the most illiberal and stupid thing you can think of. So, yeah.
Yeah, we have several more, and please short questions, because otherwise we will not finish. Please, Mandeng.
Thank you. I have a quick question. It's the institution. So we have problems taking decisions. In the European Union, we have delegated one of the most important sort of policies to an independent institution, which is the ECB. Should we not, for environmental questions, do exactly the same thing, rather than making this a council or whatever commission thing? Create an institution with the same independence that can take decisions that are so vital for our environment, and following the model that we have adopted for the ECB. Isn't that something we should consider? To have more, to have a more effective institution to take these important decisions.
I think I'm not qualified to give a very deep answer on that, but even an undeep answer would take an hour or so. I see monetary sovereignty and democratic legitimacy are something totally different than, let's say, fiscal autonomy and democratic legitimacy or environmental issues. In reality, hardly anybody gives a damn what the democratic legitimacy of my money is. There are lots of romantics around who yammer for 1 year or 10 years how they've lost the shilling or the lira or the Deutschmark. My son, he has no idea of what the shilling was. I mean, he was born then, but he doesn't care. And does he care that the governing council or the board of the ECB are not directly elected? He doesn't care, and he's a highly intelligent person. So, but there's a difference. Think of something which will be on amongst finance ministers tomorrow night. Sort of fiscal rules, fiscal sovereignty. The most efficient would be to have a fiscal union, as in the United States, 35% of GDP, income, expenditure, Bob's your uncle. You fix regional distribution issues without haggling between 27 finance ministers, even though many people would argue the US system is nearly just as inefficient. But fiscal affairs are the cornerstone of economic policy constitutions of our member states. And if we take that away, then we're in deep trouble. Let alone if we don't shift it up, let's say, to a European Parliament, but put it before what Wolfgang Schäuble used to scream across the room, unelected officials. Same thing for environment. I'm totally with you. Undemocratic, centralized imposition of environmental rules would be much more efficient than what we've got at present. But you would lose 95% of the population. We'd have an uproar. So that's one of the dilemmata that we're facing, that what works with monetary policy, because people don't really care there, simply does not work in other areas. There are some areas where we could shift the constitutional legitimacy to the European level. As in the United States, where every 4 years you have elections, some with better outcomes than others, and many other issues are at the state level. Many of them are at the mercy of the Supreme Court. So we could shift it up. Then at least we would have democratic legitimacy. But then in Europe, with all these different languages, with these different societal traditions that have already been mentioned, you have the regional distribution and legitimacy problems. So there's a huge trade-off between efficiency and legitimacy. And I think unfortunately for the environment, fortunately for democracy, the balance tips towards legitimacy.
I would like to echo the previous comment on the biodiversity issue. It's actually the existing accounting principle just recognize financial asset, not the natural capital. But fortunately, it's happening in Europe right now, that there's a TNFD, Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, as well as PBAF, which is a Partnership for Biodiversity Accounting Financial, is addressing those issues. And the way out, I think I totally agree with Christine, is that it's multi-stakeholders to participate, not only the state, but also enter the corporates as well as the financial institutions are contributing to this. Second, I think Mr. Zerbo has commented on the Europeans opening up for the African youth. I totally agree with that. And notice that recently China opened up 15 days visa-free for tourists from France, Germany, and Italy, and Netherlands. And quickly, France has reciprocated with, like, anyone has a French diploma can have a 5-year visa to France. I think that's the good way to embrace and engage the next generation of young people from China. And also, I'm curious how the following European country will do about that.
Okay. Somebody want to react? But it was more or less
a statement.
It's more a comment.
More a comment than additional information. Please.
Good afternoon. So we are really running to the end of this magnificent conference. I have one comment and one question. So I would like to comment on the issue of while we are talking about the changing international system and the climate security fight. I'm of the opinion that in a certain extent, the way how we at the West are presenting the climate change as a zero-sum option, that you have to get rid of the fossil fuels on the shortest possible time, and we are telling this to the producing countries for many years. So we have created the OPEC Plus, BRICS Plus, and this division between those who are perceived they're able to afford the energy transition in the area of the most of the countries in the world, and those who cannot, so we are deepening the gap by this. And I think we have been pushing the countries which may be willing to join, or because they see the result of see the impact of the climate emergency. But we making the question, the call so precious and so clearly calling for and asking the countries who are producing the fossil fuels to abandon them in a scope of 10, 15 years. That we are making this solution impossible. Because we know that there are a number of petrostates which have been created around the idea that they are petrostates. You remove the oil and gas from the equation, they will collapse. No way they will survive. So we put this international order in a situation to have a binary choice, and we cannot manage the situation at the end of this. So I think, to make it a long story short, I think we need a little bit more energy transition diplomacy to focus on how to get those people on board, because we are not giving them an option. So we are telling them, okay, you are right, you are wrong, so we are right, and you have to stop it. Not offering them anything in exchange. Those empty promises of the financial support are here for 2 decades, and they are not materializing from the point of view of recipient nations. Regarding the European Union, and I think you made a very important point that we are really getting to the end of certain period of the evolution of this really magnificent project. And I would like to know Ferdinando's and Thomas' view about the multi-speed Europe, or the core and the periphery, if you wish, but still within the European Union. Whether you think that one of the solutions which can be considered at a certain point of time, because the unanimity is obviously something which is a tall order, unless we have kind of extreme external pressure. So I hope to avoid this scenario, to put it aside this scenario, so provided we don't have this external very targeted pressure on the European Union, of course this would help us to get unanimity very fast, but I would like to put this aside. So whether it is possible to go through this kind of evolutionary where that we have, let's say, a majority of countries accepting unanimity, and the others, as we have this Euro, so maybe in due time they will join the core. Thank you very much.
Yeah, but because we are near the end of our time, I think there was a question to Thomas.
Ferdinando?
On the last question, I think you mentioned the possibility of another distinction between a core and a periphery. I don't like this approach, but I think it's a reality with which we have to deal with. And I would support another scheme, which I would call differentiated integration, or call it flexibility, which is the possibility for some countries that are willing to go ahead with strengthened cooperation in some policy areas to make it possible for them, provided that these forms of collaboration are open to the participation of others in the near future. And the most important examples of this is the euro and monetary policy. It's working, it's functioning. We have 20 members of the euro that are working together with the 27 members of the European Union. There are no frictions, no differences. It can be organized and managed in a manner that would make it possible to move ahead with further integration for those that want to further integration, provided that the conditions are possibility for all that decide to participate at the beginning or at a later stage. This is probably, I mean, this is a very personal opinion, but it's probably a way to reconcile enlargement and further process of integration.
I would just add two examples. I was quite deeply engaged in 2016 in discussions with Cabinet Office in London and the Treasury. And there were hard feelings on the side of the UK, of course, of the pro-Europe colleagues there in London. And why? I think in retrospect, we have to be quite self-critical that we did not have a model of integration that was well suited for the specificities of the UK, with one proviso, freedom of movement. And if I look at certain member states of today, I think they would be happier and we would be happier if they were participating in the internal market and only in the internal market and leave everything else aside. It would save them from what they perceive as conflicts of interest on external and security and la-di-da-di-da. Which brings one to the European Economic Area, which is more or less precisely, it's more than the internal market, as a matter of fact, barring agriculture. So I would agree with what Ferdinando said, with the addition, ideally, I'd like to see some member states given the opportunity of moving backwards a step and just focusing on the four freedoms. That's the good for them in economic terms, and it frees up possibilities of action for those member states that are willing and capable of going further. What we need to avoid is a Europe à la carte, where everybody just sort of, like a woodpecker, picks out this, that, and the other, what they like. But if we don't move in that direction, I'm pretty skeptical. And despite what Mario was saying half an hour ago, I think we missed the opportunities of recent previous enlargements, mainly because there's a certain dichotomy. You need to be well prepared, you need to change a lot of the institutional and legal setup that we've got, but on the other hand, especially prime ministers, they want to send political signals. And political signals is, don't confuse me, my mind is made up, don't confuse me with the facts. So we go ahead, we send a political signal to country X, if they're prepared or not, and if the Germans have been holding somebody's hand, or the French have been holding somebody's hand, it doesn't matter. And that's, those are the missed opportunities. And I hope that we will not be making these same mistakes again, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the panelists. I think we had a very good